My name is Melissa Ziobro, and I am the Specialist Professor of Public History at Monmouth University in West Long Branch, New Jersey. Today is September 9th, 2021. We are here today with Steven Padula. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. For an interview to augment the exhibit Monmouth County 9/11 and its aftermath. This interview is being recorded with the permission of all participants. Steven, can you just confirm for me that you do indeed consent to recording and that you understand this interview will live in the public domain?
I do.
Thank you. So tell us just briefly about your early life. Where and when were you born and raised?
I'm a Monmouth County resident my whole life. I was born and raised in Wall Township in an area of Wall called Glendola, a very close-knit community. Used to be farmland until we moved into the 60s. It started to get developed, and now you would never know there were any farms in that area. And I went to Wall School System, and then after the Wall School System, I went on to serve in the United States Coast Guard. And at that time I had visions of traveling abroad and maybe going on an icebreaker, but I was selected to go into the Presidential Honor Guard down in Washington, D.C. So I was part of a 70-person group down there that basically did things at the White House or the Pentagon. We did honors funerals around the country. And then I eventually went to Governor's Island, New York, where I specialized in radar. And then ended up basically taking the test for the Wall Township Police Department. And that would have been probably around 1986. And I got hired in 1987. And at the same time, I had been going to night school and weekends in the military, and I continued that when I was in Wall. An opportunity came up for me in 1991 to go to the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office. And I chose to do that. The attraction was that it was going to be basically 24/7 criminal investigations, and that interested me very much so. So I'm still at the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office. So I guess, basically it's just shy of 40 years of law enforcement experience between federal, local, and county. And I used to do criminal investigations, and now my last 10 years I've been doing more or less budget management for the office operations.
Okay. So let's bring it up to the month of September 2001. So you're working for the prosecutor's office. Was September 11th supposed to be a normal workday for you?
It was. At that time, I was in the Forensic and Technical Services Bureau. I think a lot of people now think of it as CSI. It was the forensics unit, the crime scene unit. And there were probably about 7 members of our unit at the time, and I was a sergeant, and I was a new sergeant. I was promoted in 2001. So shortly after my promotion, we were holding a meeting about previous cases during the week, which wasn't uncommon, and somebody came in about a plane hitting the World Trade Center. We did have access to a TV in our conference room, and we went back there, and I remember thinking that maybe it was a Cessna plane, a small plane that hit, kind of thinking, how are they going to put out the fire? How are they going to get a hose up there? Maybe the people saw the plane coming. I had these definitely initial denial that it was going to be okay, that the explosion was on the outside of the building, until they started showing the reruns and they started showing the close-ups. And then like the solemn thoughts came over all of us. It was just this everybody just seemed to be stunned. And then, it played out from there.
Did you know anyone who was working in Manhattan that day?
No, I was blessed that I did not know.
Yeah. Now, I know from our earlier conversations that ultimately you, as the supervisor of the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office Forensic and Technical Bureau, also known as the Crime Scene Unit, the evening of September 11th, you are called in to assist the FBI Evidence Response Team in Newark. Is that correct?
Yes, I was originally contacted by our chief of detectives that received a telephone call from the FBI Evidence Response Team out of Newark. And we formulated a plan that we would be responding on the 12th. We set up two vehicles filled with forensic equipment probably, there were about 4 detectives that accompanied me. I was the supervisor, and the plan was to go up to Newark because the FBI evidence response team is not a full-time operation. They pull from people from all over the different districts to assist when they have a major incident. Clearly, they knew that they were going to need resources, so they were reaching out to people that had expertise in the field of forensics. So I believe we were one of 3 teams that was activated, and we responded to Newark, New Jersey. There was a building opposite the train station that they commandeered, or they, lack of a better expression, they found an empty office building and they just rented out a floor, and we made that the command center. And I believe it was the Prudential building. Yeah, that's my recollection. And so I'll let you go with the follow-up question.
Well, one of my questions was going to be how they reached out to Monmouth County specifically. Do you think they called all of the counties and asked what resources they could bring to bear, or how did that work?
That's a good point. I believe it probably came down to relations and people who had worked with them in previous incidents. And I want to say Edward Kirschenbaum was probably our chief of detectives at the time. If not the chief, he was our deputy chief. And he had been a National Academy graduate, so probably one of the people that he had a liaison with was one of the supervisors up in the Newark office. He knew the kind of operation Monmouth County had. We had a lot of good equipment, a lot of good training, and we were one of the ones that went up there. I remember Bergen being another response team, and they were highly trained as well.
Okay, so you and your team of 4 additional detectives, you go up on the 12th.
That's correct.
Okay. What was the mood in the car as you're going up there? How are you feeling?
Well, personally, I was actually looking. I had a brand new. My oldest daughter was just born, and I was car shopping. Or I went out at some point. We had to go and sign the deal for this car that we were looking to get, a small SUV, upgrading because of the need. And I remember, getting the phone call at the time that I was going up there, and it was basically an overwhelming feeling. It was mixed feelings. It was, God, I mean, every police officer, fireman that I knew at the time, everybody just wanted to drop everything and go up there. People were making arrangements. I think we were going to a blood bank in Red Bank until we found out that they weren't accepting anybody. Just anything that we could do, but our hands were tied. In terms of trying to get up there because nobody knew how to do it. So now all of a sudden the phone call comes and I can be part of this operation. I was weirdly relieved and honored that I could be part of it, but I was wondering what I was going to be facing. I knew it was not going to be good. And I had experience with numerous death investigations and homicide because that was what I was trained to do. But I knew this was about to be the biggest investigation that I've ever worked on in my life.
So you arrive up at the building. You think it's the Prudential Center, but we can double check that. Now, you had a few different missions over the course of the next couple of weeks, right? According to my notes, you helped to process the hijacker's vehicle, the residences in North Jersey, with evidence and DNA collection at Ground Zero, and at the Staten Island landfill. So can we break each of those off and talk about them individually? Would that work?
Sure.
Okay, so let's talk about, what do you do first? What's your first order of business when you arrive?
Actually physically getting to the building, it was eerie quiet. The parkway was empty. I remember driving up on the parkway, and we were back to back with vehicles, and fighter planes were just flying at low altitude, screaming up and down the parkway. And it kind of, you just knew what you were going into. I was in the service. I was fortunate. I never had any type of military conflict, but it was that your body starts to tingle, your adrenaline starts to rush, and you know that this is the suspense and the concern was overwhelming. We couldn't wait to get there. And then when we actually got to the building, found out where our staging area was, it was an office complex that they were just trying to renovate to get this operation going. I have to give them credit. What they did in 24 hours was amazing. So they put the different forensic teams and they came up with a board, and as these leads came in, the first lead that came in was they had located one of the hijackers' cars from the Newark area, and it was going to be towed to a covert garage. And we had, probably about 2 or 3 hours of downtime before we were actually going to be going over and being escorted to this garage to process the car. And one of my mentors in forensics at the time was Robert Ferguson. He was a retired captain from the state police. He was a naval officer. And we had a yellow sheet of notebook paper. One of the things with forensics people, we probably have an attention to detail that's to a fault. And we wrote down the list of things that we were going to do. We had alternate light source. We had the ability to use lasers to try to find hair fibers. We had fingerprint detection equipment. Biological vacuums for trace evidence. We were treating this like, clearly it's the biggest case that ever occurred and would be in our lifetime. So we formulated a plan, take pictures of the car, then we would go into the car, we would search for evidence, then we would try to process the car for fingerprints, biological evidence, just like we would any other crime. So that was we assigned each person what we would do, and the phone call came. And at the time, I wanted to say that there was a Hilton hotel right next to the building, and they told us, why don't you go in there in case we have a couple rooms there. If you want to, freshen up, some water on your face, if you guys brought a change of clothing, you want to put onto your BDU outfit, you want to put your Tyvek suits on, whatever you want to do. And so that's where actually we went over. It was right next to that building, and we went in there, and that's where we formulated the plan. We got in our vehicles. We were escorted by the FBI. I won't disclose where we went. The vehicle was there. It was a small sedan, and they had a few FBI agents that were there from the evidence response team. And we were told that they were also going to be mobilizing some forensic experts, fingerprint experts from around the country. They were bringing in people from all over. We were also told that there was a Black Hawk helicopter that landed in the Newark area, and they put the laboratory down in Washington, D.C. All the laboratories were activated: the Secret Service laboratory, the FBI laboratory, I'm certain the DEA laboratory. They had staff 24/7, and if we found significant evidence, we would be able to transport it over to the Black Hawk helicopter, which they probably traveled like 200 miles an hour. They were going to fly the stuff down to the laboratory. They're going to be working on it immediately. So you can hear that my voice is already starting to elevate as I think about this, but you knew this was the real deal and that we had the resources, and so whatever evidence we found could be tested very quickly. And during that first couple hours, somebody had a conversation with me from an outside agency and pulled me aside and said, I just want to let you know that the hijackers died and you're spending an awful lot of time on this car. And I took a moment to catch my breath, and I said, we found a ticket in this car for a speeding violation a week ago. I've already heard on the news reports that there was a possible terrorist cell in the Virginia area around where that ticket was issued. If in fact that car had other people in that vehicle and those people did not die in the plane crash, if we find fingerprints or biological evidence, we can upload those into IAFIS and we can put them in Interpol, and if these people try to come in or out of our country again, we can identify them. I said, and that's why we're going to do what we're doing. I said that privately, and 20 years later, I still am bothered by the fact that I had to have that conversation. But that was the tempo that led us for the rest of the next couple of weeks we were up there. Nobody was going to tell us how to conduct an investigation. We were going to leave no stone unturned, and we were going to, and let me digress for a minute. We actually thought when we were up there that we were clearly going to be attacked again. There was no question in everybody's mind. We thought that the building we were in was going to be bombed. We thought that the hotel we went into the hotel, there were some people in the lobby that were walking around with suitcases. People went into the room, we actually had conversations, we might not make it out of here. It was just that sense, everybody felt that way. There were more attacks coming. When you saw the fighter planes coming, you saw ambulances and police cars running all over, there was a sense that there were multiple attacks still waiting. So that's why the heightened, like, we need to find out if there's anybody else out there. We need to find evidence. So the evidence that we collected, we found some fingerprints, we found the maps that they had circled how they were going to take certain routes, again, the ticket. We brought all that stuff over to, they had an evidence collection area, we logged all the evidence in, and then we waited for our next assignment. We never really knew what the dynamics would be in terms of who made the decision as to whether or not the evidence got on the Black Hawk helicopter and went down there. The fingerprint experts that they had flown in, it was fine, but the team that I had, we had a handful of fingerprint experts too. So the fingerprints that we were pulling, we couldn't tell who they were, but we knew that they were sufficient enough to enter into a database. And then I would say the next day they identified that were the hijackers. They started the wonderful investigators that were on the case. They found information. They found out that the hijackers were residing in the Bergen County area, perhaps even Passaic, and they found out where somebody would have an apartment that would provide the clothing for the hijackers. Somebody had a resident that would provide the money when they needed the money. So we would go to various spots and find and process for evidence. Now, they did use the Black Hawk in some of those cases. One of the cases I remember, I want to say it was perhaps West New York. We went up for one of the hijackers' apartments, and there was a Black Hawk helicopter with a nightlight that was shining down the area. The area was cordoned off, the FBI was there. They conducted a preliminary search, and then we went into the residence to conduct a forensic search, now looking for fingerprints again. And at that time, we found some evidence that was, I thought was pretty significant. It was hidden well. It was reams of copy paper, and inside the copy paper there would have been documents of prior plane travel that they took. Test runs, I would expect. But my role was not to try to decipher what the evidence meant. We documented the evidence, we documented fingerprints, we collected, photographed it, and we turned that evidence over to the FBI. But it was clear that this was a pretty significant operation when it wasn't something that just happened one day. When you started to find documentation that there was some planning and there was actually test flights being done.
As you're in the neighborhoods, what's the mood like? Did you feel that the neighbors were hostile to the investigation? Or, I mean, what was it like? Were they surprised to find that their neighbors had been involved in this?
I think that from what I learned and in hearing the conversations on the street, these people didn't socialize the hijackers. They kept a low profile. I mean, some of them made mistakes and they went to nightclubs and spent money right before they actually got on the planes, to knowing that they were going to die. And clearly some of those moves allowed investigators to track down expenditures. But no, they weren't high profile at all. Interestingly, one of the hijackers was actually, when we went to get water the first day we were there, and we had to go down by the train station right across, I don't think it was, maybe Penn Station, but one of the hijackers apparently was working at the news station. He helped out at the news station, and so, law enforcement had been going for a month, whether they got a bagel or something to drink, and then the person was there. So they didn't raise any suspicion. It was just somebody who seemed to be a worker that was providing a service. What the person's ultimate role was, I don't know, but if trained investigators, their spider senses didn't go over because somebody was handing them a bottle of water and the person was going to be a hijacker a month later, that doesn't really surprise me. If you're not engaging the person and they don't speak your language, so you're not going to be able to communicate with them. But no, there was a lot of people were not on the streets, and the people that did came out, they were offering investigators, waters or anything you needed. There was the there were people on the side of the road that were teenagers, high school kids, that were large groups that would sit there with candles. I mean, when you think 20 years later that there's people on the side of the road now that are upset about police, and I'm not going to debate the fact that there aren't some problems, and very small problems, that need to be addressed, but there was a sense of the police and fire and EMS workers, wherever you walked around in uniform during that time, people were coming up to you and thanking you, and you could just look at their eyes. They were so thankful that you were doing things, and that empowered you to do these things even more. Like, most people probably wish they could have helped, but they didn't have the expertise or the ability to help like we did. So we really felt like we were helping everybody else. We were being their voice.
So this is unfolding over several weeks. Were you and your team sleeping up there, or you're commuting from Monmouth County?
The first night after we finished the car, yes, we did stay overnight. I think just for a couple hours. We had a briefing in the morning, maybe 2 or 3 hours of being able to rest, but who rested? You were able to lie down. Your adrenaline was flowing so much. You gave a presentation the next morning as to what you found, and then they started to come up with a schedule for a shift. And we were selected to work a 7 at night to 7 in the morning shift. So I can't speak for some of the operations that went out during the days, but at nighttime, which actually some of the more significant things happened at night, because during the day, the boots on the ground, talking to people, they would come up with the information, and by the time they put the search warrant paperwork together with the U.S. attorneys, that's when we would go out, sometimes at 1 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock. And so we would commute from Monmouth County. We would probably leave at like 5 o'clock. We would get up there for the 7 to 7 shift, and then leave at like 7:15, get home around 8:30, just go to sleep and just do the whole thing again for the first couple weeks.
So let's talk a little bit about the evidence and DNA collection at Ground Zero phase.
Okay, so when I told you when we were up at the FBI Command Center, they would give you out, they were called details, assignments. So eventually now we got assigned to, if you don't mind, we got assigned to Ground Zero. And at that time we were told we were going to assist with some perimeter security, but we're also going to be assisting with any type of evidence collection. When we got there, we drove in the tunnels. Everything was shut down. The signs were all you were able to go right downtown without seeing another car. And when you got to the perimeter, it was pretty clear pretty quickly that there wasn't going to be a lot of evidence collection. But if you don't mind me adding, I will say that the expressions of the EMS, the fire, and the police that were there when we got there, and they probably had been there from the beginning, because they didn't want to, nobody wanted to leave. It looked like, and I can only say this from television shows, it was a war zone. It was like the pictures that you saw in France with the bombings, or during World War II. It was just devastation. There wasn't a single building in that area that you could even went in to get a glass of water. Everything was bombed out, and they set up little tents on the side where they would have people going over. They were hosing them down. You would try to like give a hello or somebody, or an acknowledgement to somebody, and there was emotionless. Everybody just wanted to work. They wanted to do something. They had that bucket brigade. The people were just moving and doing things and putting fire hoses all over, just shooting onto for them to actually get into the pile, some of those pieces of iron that were laid on top of each other with thousands and thousands of pounds, they can only go in between the debris. So it was heart-wrenching to see these firemen who, and I want to say the police and the EMS, all of them, they went there and they knew that some of their partners, they weren't leaving. And it was so sad to see that, and that those thoughts keep with me. So there wasn't a lot for us to do at Ground Zero with the perimeter, and so quickly that migrated maybe 1 or 2 shifts, and then we ended up going to the Fishkills landfill, because at that time they had a program in place where they were taking truckloads of material and they were taking barges, and so they were bringing stuff down, debris, and then they would either by barge or by truck bring it to the Fishkills landfill, which had been closed, but they opened it up, and they set up a whole operation there where they were going to look for, at that point they were looking for DNA. We were also looking for the black boxes from the plane. And one step back, because we were, I guess, deputized with the feds, Building 7 was a federal building, and there were some operations there that were highly confidential. So that's where we were going to the perimeter area of Building 7, which was clearly right next to the debris field. And so our instructions when we went up, they were trying to come up with a plan where if they removed debris from the north or the south tower, they were bringing them to various spots at the Fishkill landfill. And if they were bringing debris from Building 7, they were bringing that to a special area, and that area was gated off, and you had to have basically a clearance to get in there. So we won't get into details with some of the things that we were looking for at that area, but we were definitely looking for, we were looking for the orange, they call them black boxes, but they were orange. They were looking for that, and there was a couple other key items that we were looking for, primarily for that aspect. Now they had hundreds, when I say hundreds, 300 to 500 police officers, firemen, EMS, and if I'm sorry if I'm missing any of the titles of the first responders. They were coming in waves, and they were taking shifts at the landfill, and these people were provided rakes, and they would come up with the truck would dump all the stuff out, and then the other vehicles would come out, and cranes would move the big giant I-beams, and they would go through raking the debris, looking for evidence. And they were, they had Tyvek suits on, but it was so hot, most of the people couldn't do the operation without removing their masks. It was like they were just there they just wanted to be there. They flew in every federal agency that you can imagine. They liquidated their assets all over the world, and they flew them in, and they tried to coordinate it. And all the police department and fire departments were sending waves of people in from all over the country, either to take the calls for the fire department and actually participate. So those people would I think they did 12-hour shifts as well up there. But when we got in there, and you got the first rake, because before they actually said, okay, you're going over, you're going to be doing DNA, we had rakes, and you figure 50,000 people worked in those buildings. I didn't see a desk, a chair, or a floppy disk the entire time I was there. I saw rubble, dust, and I-beams. So, and then occasionally you would find something that you needed to classify as DNA. And so that went on for weeks, and then we might have got pulled off of that to go to another residence or to go to another area, and that was probably like 3 to 4 weeks of doing that primarily. One of the things that I just thought that one of the things that I guess haunting might be the word. When we collected the stuff, some of the stuff were pictures, ripped pictures, and that would be stuff that you would collect. Not just the detectives and the police officers and the firemen, if they found something, they would raise their hand, and we would go over there with the buckets. If it was a personal item, we would handle it one way, with the idea that they would try to put that down the road in a different tent, and then they set up a DNA tent, and if we found something that was of biological nature, we would take that and put that into another facility and another container and bring that over. But like one of the things that I came across was a battered attaché case, and inside the attaché case was a soccer schedule for who was going to be bringing oranges to the next game. And I always regretted that I didn't document that and follow up myself, to find out if the person survived, or more about the person. I just did what I was supposed to do. I brought it to the tent. But that's where seeing the pictures of like kids' Halloween pictures or the things that were on the desks, that's what brought it back for the reality. And like I said, nobody talked. when you went to get a bottle of water, if you were lucky to get a bottle of water, the first couple of weeks, it didn't even seem like anybody wanted to take a break. Nobody talked. We didn't communicate with each other. Everybody was just the outside people. It wasn't like you're saying, how are you doing? Nobody wanted to say, how are you doing?
Yeah.
So that's leads you into another question.
This is obviously an incredibly gut-wrenching experience for all of you that are there. And I know at first you're just so busy, but is there any point at which counseling services are offered to those of you who are working on this?
I'm sure there were, but I'm also sure that there was probably nobody that wanted to do it. Again, like the people like in law enforcement and probably fire departments, a lot of people are pro-military. And you spent your whole career with these people that served in Vietnam or at some point early, maybe somebody in Korea, but they never spoke about their experience. So you're kind of trained like, yeah, I'm not going to speak about that. So it was a long time before anybody spoke about it. As a matter of fact, leading up to the interview, I was sharing, when I told you I grew up in a small area wall in Glendola, I'm still friendly with a fellow that I went to kindergarten with, John Roche, and he was on the police department, a corporal at the time in 9/11. And when it happened, same thing. There was a relationship with the Newark FBI, with their chief of police, and he went up there with probably like 6 people the next morning, and they were on the bucket brigade. We never spoke about that until yesterday, where actually told me how they went to the bucket brigade, and I was asking them, I told him I was going to be interviewed, and I said, we never spoke about this, and he's been upset a little bit because the 20th year is affecting a lot of people now, because there's this whole thing. I'd like to document everything, but I also need to eventually, I'm just happy to be able to be here, to be able to tell the story, because it's been on my mind for 20 years, and so I think I helped him out by allowing him to tell me his story. And when they ran up there for the bucket brigade, I just think it's important to document, because I don't know who you've spoken to, but he said they went all the way downtown, they got right up to ground zero, and they jumped right into this long line with the bucket brigade. And I said, well, what did they give you? He said, we got a pair of gardening gloves, and we got like this little paper mask. And we would have to dump out the mask every once in a while because there was so much soot in our nose. And I said, did you locate bodies? He said, early on, you would be doing the buckets, and then somebody would say, we got somebody. And then they would take the body bag from all the way at the end of the line. They'd bring it all the way up to the front of the line, then they'd put the body in the thing and do that. And I was like, I was fortunate that I was not there for that part. The issues and the body recovery that we did was small biological evidence. So, he was like, yeah. And so he told me a few other stories about some of the workers that they'd have to pull them out of the line because they didn't want to leave. They had been there for 24 hours. So I'm sorry to segue, but I thought that was important. And so, because that shows you like Monmouth County response. Yeah. Police, fire, another person that I know, Donna Morgan, she was in the forensics unit. We had, everybody in the office wanted to go, but we knew that we also had to deal with Monmouth County problems as well. I just happened to be selected with my group, and these other people had to take care of all the other things that went on in Monmouth. But I found out later that this girl, Donna Morgan, who's now a captain in the prosecutor's office, she was a lieutenant at the Englishtown Fire Department. They jumped on a truck and they went up there, and she told me some of the stories, and this is 20 years later that we finally having this conversation about what she did. So another area too is that whole time that this went on, the first 3 weeks, it was almost as if crime pulled back across the country. Our homicide, our aggravated assaults went down. People were so devastated that you could say the country came together. I'm not going to say that the criminals decided we're going to stand down. I think this even affected the criminals. So we were able to function by sending a lot of people out there because crime went significantly down. We had a couple cases in the county where people firebombed gasoline stations, thinking that they were owned by, a terrorist organization, or there was a little bit of craziness there, but that was very remote. So we were very fortunate. And then you had people, when we would come back, we would hear stories about having to go up to a train station because I might have been, oh boy, Mattawan, where cars had never left and things like that. So that's a good point let you segue into follow-up.
Yeah, no, everything you're sharing is so important. We found that the 20th anniversary is hitting differently for a lot of people. Some who have been talking about their experiences have decided the 20th is the time where they're going to stop and put it behind them. And some are just ready to talk about it for the first time. So that's a really important point that you mentioned. How long were you working up there with the FBI?
Through probably the end of November or December. Okay. It significantly, after the first 4 or 5 weeks, it dropped off significantly. Now we had an arrangement where we would just be on call. So if they had a shortage with personnel, because at this point now the operation has escalated and they have laboratories, they have laboratories operation, they have DNA facilities. So we would go up 1 week for a 12-hour shift and then the next week. So most of it was the first 30 days.
Was it difficult to transition back into your pre-September 11th life, both your personal life and your work life?
I don't think I was conscious about it, but early on. But I think probably everybody that was up there, I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I think it's fair to say that we left there thinking that the problems that we thought we had weren't really problems. I actually had a friend, I call him Dr. Lou. I went to a fella for probably 8 or 9 years, someone I could talk to. He was a first aider, but he also had his PhD, and he actually, we would talk. I would probably talk every 2 weeks for him for years, because I knew that trying to raise 2 young children at the same time, when somebody said, we're low on milk, or, or what, the dinner wasn't cooked just right, I didn't care. I didn't care anymore, and that wasn't really fair, but I'm not alone with that. I think we all had this, come on, how can we be worried about what's going on? I was worried about I didn't get a chance to cut the lawn because it rained. Yeah. I think that went on for a long time. You became kind of callous to what the day-to-day things were, because we're here, these families, thousands of people as a result of that. And now, reading just the other day, another, there was or I should say a couple months ago, there was a state trooper that just passed because of 9/11 related stuff, and put that out now nationally. The death toll that we had is just rising, and I feel for everybody. I feel very fortunate.
I wanted to ask you if you've suffered any ill effects from the toxicity at Ground Zero or the landfill.
I would say probably minor stuff, because I hope that I'll be, I hope that everything's fine, but I think that goes hand in hand with the overall feeling compared to what I saw. Did I go for my annual physicals? I participated in that as a baseline person. I was recently told that, my breathing's in good shape. I went to the World Trade Center. They have a program to keep everybody healthy for a baseline. I was lucky, our office allowed us to go after the first year, so I had a good baseline. But after the 3rd or 4th time I went up there to Mount Sinai in New York, it's a chilling experience to see people my age or younger with nasal cannulas walking in looking like they're 10 years older than they should be. Now, those people were the ones that were the first responders, went there, and they had probably masks that weren't, HEPA certified. I mean, I did have a forensic background. I knew a little bit about what needed to be done. We just couldn't get the supplies when we were up there. Everybody ran out. But I think it's also important to add, and I don't want to be political in this, but I think it's fair to know that when we went out and got activated, Monmouth County at that time was the Board of Freeholders with the county prosecutor. After the first day that we got back, they wanted us to report in. They said, what do you need? what will it take? We needed a special fingerprint scope. We needed some additional DNA stuff. They went out and contacted the vendor, whatever it took. They paid for it, they equipped us, they gave us what we wanted. You couldn't get masks and things like that, but anybody, county government-wise, where they could help, everybody helped. There was no questions asked. So I think that's important, because focusing a lot on the first responders, but everybody else, you know, there were trucks that were pulling in from Timberland, water trucks that would pull up to the landfill, vendors just with metal-toed shoes because people didn't have them and they were going into that, like, it was incredible, the outpouring of support that came in from the country. Or food would be delivered, and I remember one time I was at one of the buildings that was blown out, that was a former restaurant, and we went in to get a bottle of water, and I remember Susan Saranda, I didn't recognize her at first, but because she was, you know, just dressed, she was, it was all dusty and everything, and she was walking around and she would just come up and pat you on the shoulder and say thank you and hand us a bottle of water. Wow. I didn't recognize a lot of the other people, but those people that were in that area came out just to do whatever they could do.
Wow. Did you follow closely the work of the 9/11 Commission? Were you interested in the investigations that followed at the national level?
I don't think so. I mean, I watched the news nightly. What I really was hoping, that I was waiting to have a debriefing from all the information that we had. So, and I made that known, trust me, that what I did is I wrote up a document after my experience of what I thought could have been done better, how we could have picked the people to respond. Again, would that have solved anything? I mean, it was after the fact about going up there forensically, but I took everything that we learned from that experience, how we could properly train people in the future, maybe have courses that police officers from the local level could have a chance to interact with the FBI. So when incidents like this happen, there's more cohesiveness early on. You know, I'm 20 years later, I didn't get a response to my proposal, but assuming that somebody did read it, and somebody took some action, and it's just one of those things. I didn't look for a pat on the back. All I wanted was to try to do my part to make things better. I would like to know whether or not they identified anybody else as a result of the fingerprints or the DNA that we collected, whether we stopped any attacks. That would probably make me feel good before I pass on, you know, in life, to know that there was something there. But other than I also went to a workshop with the FBI, so I learned a lot, and I shared earlier prior to the interview that I knew a lot about how the funding mechanism and how they went about doing it. So the fact that I learned a lot about how they accomplished this, I seemingly was less interested in the ultimate investigation part later. I do know from reading news accounts now that our government continues through the lawyers for the people who died and are getting sick, they continue to seek records. And I want to say that there was a presidential release of some information recently, and those documents will interest me quite a bit, finding out how much people knew and when. And I think as a society that's good for us to know, because we need to be vigilant.
We've touched on this a little bit, but one of my questions is, do you feel like there were lessons learned at the local, county, state, federal level, just as a society? Do you feel like there were any lessons learned?
The lesson learned that cooperation and teamwork is invaluable. And it's no fault from the municipal, the county, the state, and the federal level. Everybody worked in their own area. You know, in Monmouth County, we're fortunate. The county works very well with the locals. We work very well with the state, but we don't have a lot of interaction with the federal government. And that's probably a good thing, because we're in a safe community. But it would be, the lesson to be learned here is we need to have a better information sharing structure, which I think I didn't coin this, because that's exactly what came out of the early commissions, is agencies need to talk to each other. If I find something that's evidential value, I should be able to see and improve and to know for certainty that that actually went to the next level and something was done with it as a double check. You know, like, so like if I'm handling a homicide now and I collect a piece of evidence and I go to the state police lab or I go to a private laboratory for DNA analysis, I just don't send the package. I now, lessons learned, I'll make the phone call to follow it up. Are you working on it? Who's assigned to it? Maybe that's something that I didn't do before, but now I realize that it's clear that there was a lack of communication back then between bureaucracies. They had information, but they weren't sharing it. I was like, yeah, and maybe a little bit we did it on a smaller level, but I make sure that there's a follow-up. I don't rely on anyone else to have the same attention to detail that I have. Maybe it's insulting to them, but they'll end up getting a phone call. And so I just hope that if anybody ever listens to the tape and somebody goes into the federal service or they go to the local and the state, what they get out of this is, if you feel that there's something wrong or your spider senses go off, that's what we call it in our business. If you just get that funny feeling, you get that tingly feeling, tell somebody about it. And then follow up with it. What did you do with that information? Because otherwise it haunts you, wondering what happened. So, and the other lessons learned is we should have debriefings after, every 1 or 2 weeks, you get together key people and you should talk about it in an open forum, like what you're doing to me 20 years later, asking me information that I was never asked for 20 years. And now I'm sharing it. And I wanted to share information that might be helpful. This is more of a documentary, but early on the forensic side, I wanted to share information, but I got a lot of, I'll get back to you on that.
Do you think it was simply that the FBI or the other agencies were just overwhelmed, or that they had used your work and now sent you home and didn't feel a need to inform you? So was it a conscious decision not to keep the local helpers informed?
Early on, they had full justification for it, right? There was, it happens even on our level. If we're dealing with a murder and the local police department is asking various questions, 90% of the time you're trying to give them exactly what they need to know, but meanwhile you're going to a different homicide, you're going out there, you may have not had that, may have not gave them the 100% attention right away, but you follow up later. So I completely understand. That investigation was spinning because they're concerned that there's something else happening. But when we got to a point where things settled down and we identified the money, we identified the key actors, we identified the overseas actors, there should have been a coming together of the minds to talk about the lessons learned that you just asked me. So, I don't conscious effort, no. I think it was because of the situation. And then maybe it was, people have retired, people have moved on, and they're moved on to other things, right? Other disasters that take place around the country.
Did 9/11 change local law enforcement in any way?
Right after 9/11, the county prosecutor at the time, John Kay, we formed Homeland Security. We never had that before, and we were early on. The county's always been pretty proactive in Monmouth County. They formed a Homeland Security office. We staffed it with 1 or 2 detectives, and we had a sergeant. It was unheard of. And they would go out. We would do business assessments. We would do threat assessments in the community. They would give talks to big companies that would move in. We would give them talks about computer security, lighting, things that we never did before. So that's one of the things that came out of it was everybody became more vigilant. That was the message, be more vigilant. You see something that is suspicious, pick up the phone. I think New Jersey Transit used to have it. If you see a suspicious package, ours was like they would go out and they would send messages like to the truck drivers and the unions and say, you see something, you know what, here's our number, call us. Doesn't matter what it is. If something bothers you, in your experience, let us know. Let's follow it up.
Do you think 20 years later we're losing any of that vigilance?
I think some of it has been overshadowed because of what's been going on in society lately. And again, I want to be really cautious. Like in law enforcement, clearly, 99%, right, if not higher, everybody does a great job, and you have some bad apples and they just ruin it, and I'm sure every police officer would like to go and probably pass on their own justice that they think the person needed. So I think a lot of media has focused a lot on law enforcement's, the negativity of it, but here we are with COVID, and I was thinking on my way over, so if there's a fight, if somebody's about to get murdered or shot, or there's somebody in a burning building, the firemen, the first aider, and the police are going in. They're not concerned about, they're not working at home. Mm-hmm. They're not working remotely. They're going to do what they have to do. Mm-hmm. They're not going to think twice about it. If they're driving down in the car and somebody's speeding, that's a separate issue. But if somebody's life is in danger, law enforcement, fire, and first aid, regardless of their personal safety, is going to try to save lives. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's changed. I hope that there's a lot of people that want to get into this career. I do see that the applications have dropped off, where we used to have 500 applications at any time, somebody looking to get into the academy. I understand that's dropped off. And I think the, police and law enforcement have to try to probably bolster and maybe do a little bit more positive reinforcement to the community. I know we're going to be doing that at the prosecutor's office, getting out there and addressing groups about, trying to be a diverse organization and trying to be reactive to the community, to bring that trust back, to try to lure in some good people to become police officers again. But right now, people are at the time, right, to further answer your question. You had professional football player, right, that just dropped his career to jump into the military to go overseas. You had people that dropped out of college to become police officers to go in the military. So 20 years later, I don't think we have that same esprit de corps feeling that people want to do it. I'm positive we'll get through this because we have to.
Do you think we as a nation are safer than we were on 9/11?
Yes. Yeah, they spent, I think reading the articles, we spent $450 billion in infrastructure to airports. Can only imagine the other money that was spent in formulating. They increased the size of the FBI, the CIA. We came up with, now we have a National Security Administration, right? We have these investigative agencies we did not have. So yes, we are safer than we were. I don't mind if I have to wait an hour to get on a plane. I do feel uncomfortable, but I think that I'm a little bit in a better position not to worry about it than somebody that didn't experience it. I'm not going to have that conversation with them, but the fact that you were able to go on planes with knives before, and now you're at least getting screened, and there's probably some additional background checks. I just hope that the things that I don't know about, I hope that the government has addressed things like what the hijackers were able to do, is they were able to open up bank accounts with a small amount of money. A law allowed them, if they charged stuff on a credit card, which was all fictitious, as long as they made one payment on the credit card, they were allowed to keep the credit card kept open. And so they learned how to manipulate our system. So I'm hopeful that the people that are more educated in that area have stopped that kind of stuff, but at least from a security aspect, we're much safer now.
You mentioned that you have children. Have you spoken to your family about your experiences?
They were, at the time, I had a 5-year-old, I guess, 3 or 5 year, they were 3 and 5. So they didn't know anything. And as time went by, my daughter ended up having, my oldest daughter had a student who lost his father. So at least the school engaged in conversations about that, so she knew a little bit more about it. Yeah. They had their own, Middletown area in the northern part of the county was a lot more. And then in our neighborhood, we had a Port Authority officer who passed away, and they named our local park Heroes Park after him. So, they knew what was going on. I probably touched base with it, but also my career in forensics really couldn't tell them too much about what really happened. I think recently both of my daughters have probably heard, as now we're getting close to the 20th, I think I laid out some of the stuff I just laid out to you about what was going on.
For, the younger generation coming up, like your children or my students who don't have personal memories of 9/11, what do you want them to remember about that day, that period in our history?
I thought of it as one of the things that comes is like our Pearl Harbor. It was our generation's horrific period of time. Our country was weaker than we thought. We were infiltrated, but we came together for a long period of time. For months, the country was unified. It was, as much as it was a horrific experience, the experience of the public recognizing the first responders went on for a long time. I can't tell you that the people on the West Coast felt the same way as we did. When the Oklahoma bombing came, we recognized it was a problem, but it was still not the same because we didn't identify with the people in our community. So it's just, we should never forget that these people did that they knew it was a horrible situation, and they, regardless of their personal safety, they went in and did this, and that all these innocent people lost their lives. I was remiss in one other thing when we talked about the Fishkill landfill, and that is, there was, in addition to the material, the construction material, all of the EMS vehicles and the fire vehicles were also brought there. Mm-hmm. So there was a whole section that had hook and ladder fire trucks, those big apparatuses, mm-hmm. that were just mangled, EMS vehicles that were crushed, seemingly hundreds. And eventually, these firemen or EMS workers who were up there would see those vehicles in the distance, and they would make their way over. And I remember driving by every night when we left in the morning, and we would have to pass by all those vehicles. And people would go out, and because they were covered with dust, and they would put hearts on them, or they put the person's fireman badge on there. And those are the memories that kind of live on, like those people that actually lost somebody and then actually got to see the fire truck from their firehouse station and actually went there. So that.
Well, Steven, this is a tremendously important story, and I'm so honored that you sat down with us to allow us to preserve it for the record. We're going almost an hour now. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
No, I'd like to thank you for participating and organizing this event. And I think you said you participated, this county venture. I think it's so important that this is memorialized. I think, in speaking for everybody that I worked for and that I know, and like I said, I just spoke to my friend in Florida who is obviously, now he's talking about this. There's no doubt that this 20-year was different in 10 and 15. This 20 is like, we're getting older, and we don't want anybody to forget, mm-hmm. but we also want to try to have some type of life knowing that we preserved what we needed to preserve, and we told the story, and it's memorialized, and people will remember this, and it's a good time right now because police, law enforcement is not being viewed at the standard of what they were back in 9/11, and they're still doing those jobs and called to do it. Mm-hmm. So I think this honors the victims that lost their lives, this honors the first responders who lost their lives, and it honors all those people who are sick and all their family members who had to deal with it, the wives, the husbands, the significant partners. They had to deal all this time with the stress of those people. This has reached out to family members of the deceased. It's no way just law enforcement. And by doing this, I think it's so nice, just like the Mount Mitchell mm-hmm. Memorial. That's a wonderful tribute, and that actual piece of iron that's in the claws was removed from the Fishkill landfill mm-hmm. when we were up there. Somebody made arrangements, and just the sculptor at the time was like, this would be wonderful to put that in there. So Monmouth County actually brought such a valuable piece of memory and memorialize it up there at Mount Mitchell.
I actually interviewed the sculptor,
Yeah.
and it was beautiful to hear how he worked through that process and wanted to create that memorial for everyone.